Please welcome to the stage, Marklogic CEO and President, Gary Blue.
The representative from California has the floor.
Good morning. So I see that a few of you actually pay attention to the lyrics of music. So the representative from California has arrived. And then, by the way, for those of you that have never heard that song, it goes socially incorrect beyond that. So we had to be very careful of where we cut off the lyrics. But just as Ken did, I want to welcome you to Marklogic World. This is an event for you. It's for you to learn and learn from each other. We're going to share all kinds of information about what's going on in the database market with Marklogic. There's a ton of breakout sessions in Chicago and in Tokyo both. The breakout sessions were invaluable to everybody. And then there's even workshops again tomorrow for the technical hands-on. Those have been really well attended. So I'm very happy to be here, happy to have the opportunity to kind of share some perspective with you on kind of what's happening in the Marklogic world. But before we go to the Marklogic world, where I want to start is I want to just talk about technology evolution. And, kind of if you ask how has technology evolved, if we think about it from a consumer perspective, we tend to see very, very fast transitions. If we look at it from an enterprise perspective, not quite so fast. Even though most people in IT today would look at it and say, well, the industry is moving really rapidly. We're switching to new database technologies. To Ken's point, we're switching to new storage devices, except that those transitions have actually been in progress for 15 plus years, in some cases 30 plus years. So in the database industry, as an example, the last time we had a real transition in the database market was about 30 years ago. That's when people started moving off mainframe hierarchical and started moving to relational databases. So in an interesting way, the evolution in the enterprise has been a little bit different. But then I also suspect if you look at the market today versus even what your expectation for the market was 5 years ago, my guess is the evolution has been a little different on that front as well. And that doesn't matter whether it's consumer technology or non-consumer technology. We get an expectation in our mind, sometimes driven by the media, sometimes driven by hype, sometimes just driven by intrigue and interest, but then it's not always how it quite plays out. So if we look at some, and I'm going to hit a few quotes from people that I consider very smart individuals, forward-thinking, everything else, but they don't always get it right. So if you're looking at the trends going, hey, maybe I didn't quite get it right, and maybe the market and the world's evolved differently than what I expected, well, some of the smartest people that run some of the smartest and biggest enterprise companies have missed it as well. And this is one from Steve Ballmer, no chance the iPhone's going to get any significant market share. Back in 2007, I think we were still in the little Motorola flip phones back about that time. But then, BlackBerries were out there. BlackBerries were still incredibly popular. Curious, this show of hands if anybody's willing to admit it. My wife called me, I was one of the last ones to pry my BlackBerry out of my hands. And we were standing in front of an Apple store, and my battery had just died, and I couldn't do anything. My wife dragged me into the Apple store and said, you are getting an iPhone. You look ridiculous standing there using a BlackBerry. So I'm just curious, anybody here still have a BlackBerry? Oh, there's a couple hands went up. They must work for a major bank, and the major bank has said, thou shalt have a BlackBerry. But if we look back, you go back, and it's like in 2016, Apple shipped 215 million iPhones. So this is a trend. It didn't gain any significant market share at all, other than in the U.S. market, Apple has 40% share of the U.S. market. So a little off in the prediction there. In the world of electric cars, last month Tesla surpassed Ford in market value. And you say, well, of course, they're innovative, they're new, they're next generation. All true, all very, very disruptive technology. And you can start seeing that some parts of the world, financial markets in particular, do value disruptive technologies. But it's a little bit odd when I think about this market cap. The term bubble comes to mind. I think most of us in the room have lived through a bubble or two. If we actually look at the Tesla situation, last year they shipped less than 80,000 cars. If you put that in perspective, I'm kind of a car guy, so I kind of follow these statistics quite a bit. In 2016, so Tesla sold less than 80,000 cars in all of the year. Ford Motor Company sold over 85,000 F-150 trucks in the month of December. Yet Tesla's worth more money. By the way, Ford, to that 80,000 number, if I take annual results, shipped just under 2.6 million cars in 2016. Yet they're worth essentially equivalent, or in this case, Tesla, a higher market value. A little different than you would expect. The craziest innovation that kind of came as we were putting all this together, and one of our marketing guys said, well, what about pizza? You know, the age-old art and age-old craft almost of making pizzas. And in Palo Alto, in our local area in California, there's now a robot that's making pizzas. Yeah, who would have thought that we'd have a robot making pizzas? And what they're trying to do, they actually have a vision to disrupt the pizza industry around the world. Pretty big disruption. And they're starting to think about drones and other things for delivery. So kind of a whole new concept of, you know, now I have the beer, I don't even have to go to the pizza shop to get it. Something's just going to drop it on my kitchen table. It's going to be really cool. But who would have thought that, you know, pizzas are going to get made by robots? And then if we start moving to more modern trends around cloud, so this is just 2008. You know, Larry, I've worked with Larry, as many of you know. He sometimes says some interesting things. He's usually a little off on a few things. This is one where he was pretty far off to think that in 2008, it's complete gibberish. It's insane. When is this idiocy going to stop? When he's talking about cloud computing. It's kind of a strange statement. It's even stranger for us because in 2009, we had our first cloud customer running Marklogic in an Amazon environment. So if you think about it from that lens, it was already starting to happen, yet in 2008, Oracle's predicting that, you know, I don't know what all this craziness and sanity is around the cloud. And by the way, this was part of their visionary conference. This was Oracle Open World is when he said this in 2008. So they're laying out the vision for the future, yet the vision for the future did not include the cloud. So what if we fast forward November 2016, he couldn't predict what was going to happen, but now adjusting their entire business model to be cloud, upsetting a fair amount of customers saying, hey, if you want this capability, you have to go to the cloud. Yeah, they're forcing people to cloud. We've seen a lot of vendors now say, my next release is cloud only. I can only go there. Well, why do you think some of the vendors are doing you only can go in the cloud, you have to go there? Why do you think they're doing it? It's for this reason. It's the idea that says they're going to be more profitable. If your software company is going to be more profitable, why do you think that's happening? Because you're going to have to spend more money to get the same technology. It's not about innovation, it's about deployment model. And so it's a really interesting kind of transition to go from, you know, it's gibberish to it's going to make us the most profitable company ever. And that's the shift that's going on. So again, 8-year window didn't quite get the transition right. So if we look across industries, it's happening in every industry. If we're disrupting the pizza industry, if I go into healthcare, a whole new way is about thinking about how to serve up patients, keep patient records and information, have knowledge about patients. And then, of course, you have automotive industry, but you have lots of industries going through lots of disruption. This disruption is just nonstop. It's almost every day. I mean, there's different kinds of disruption in the world, but certainly, you know, what's happening with robotics, what's happening with healthcare, what's happening in manufacturing, we're just watching these transitions come about really quickly. In the car industry, you know, if you think about the disruption of new car features, the whole introduction of electric cars, hybrid electric cars, all these different things, the idea that your car stops running when you're at a stop sign, and then it starts as you push your accelerator and goes. So it's just lots of technology, lots of shifts. So the question that I'd pose to you is the same thing happening in databases. Are we seeing that kind of similar thing where, hey, there was a lot of people that got it wrong, a lot of people that forecast the future differently, but then we actually have the disruption itself. So is the same true with databases? Of course it's true with databases. if we look at this, quote, big data movement, and big data is a term that not very many people are using in the same way they were using it even 4 and 5 years ago. And 4 or 5 years ago, it was like, I don't even know what it is. Big data is like, is it big because there's a lot of it? Is it big because it's a big file? What defines big data? And so the market's kind of moved away from that, but the early expectation of this next generation data market is a little bit that it was kind of all about speeds and feeds. And it was all about the velocity that you could collect data and the variety of the data. The whole introduction of, oh, I'm going to bring in unstructured data. I'm going to use all my data, and I'm going to bring in unstructured. That was kind of the early expectation. And in fact, if you go back to most of the analyst reports, even 5 to 7 years ago, a lot of it was talking about the idea of 80% of the world's data is unstructured, and most of you can't do anything with it. But we're coming to find out that wasn't the only trend happening in database. Then, as I mentioned, we went into the big data confusion, so the hype of big data and what is big data, and to some extent kind of evolved to, well, it's really just doing analytics with your data. If you talk to a lot of CEOs in the marketplace in different industries, the CEO will tell you, you ask them what's big data, it's about being able to analyze my business and make decisions. Very analytics focused. And now as the market's starting to mature, the trend that we're seeing is really if you talk to CEOs and you ask them what they really need, is what they say is that, hey, I need data to run my business. I need it. I need that data, and I need it in real time. I need things to get to me quicker. The lag time from IT, from the time I want to do something with my data to the time I can actually do it, the lag time is too long. And so this market kind of went from that early expectation to the hype cycle. I kind of believe this past year, more so than ever, we're kind of moving into, it's all kind of maturing. We're not seeing the same, kind of sword fights amongst different vendors. In the next generation space, vendors have kind of found their swim lanes as far as what they sell, what problem they solve, and the market's starting to consolidate. And you'll see in the analyst reports over and over and over, less and less vendors getting highlighted. So the market's starting to narrow to the winners and the losers, and what it's really doing, though, it's not just winners and losers, it's narrowing down to a mature view of, I have a business to run, I have information about my business. I need to use that information to run my business. So, what about the vision? And this is still kind of playing out on that transition from hype to reality. We went pretty heavy through a part of the market that said, everything's going to be open source. I remember talking to one of the VCs in the Valley, and we were doing a fundraising round about 5 years ago, and this one VC told us, he goes, I would never invest in any software companies because everything's going to be open source just like it is today. This was 5 years ago, and we literally got in the elevator scratching our heads going, just like it is today, outside of Red Hat and the Linux operating system, there wasn't a lot of the rest of the industry running in the open source world. So it was kind of a misguided expectation, but what it really was there was a lot of hype around it, and the idea that, quote, it was free. Most people have figured out it's actually not free. It hasn't quite gone the way it did. And then the legacy vendors, the way they started dealing with the data change is they kind of said, okay, well, you can put all that data in your traditional relational database. And so you saw Oracle and IBM both, for their relational products, they introduced XML. What a novel idea. Let me put an XML let me put an XML document in a relational database. Now, you can do that. You can't do anything with it, but you can put it in there. You still can't search it. You can't manage it. You don't have the flexibility to actually look through it. So in a way, the open source and the legacy vendors, they kind of failed to really deliver on the real vision, either because of manpower and labor, because of cost, because of missing features, because of not understanding the marketplace. And then we kind of move into what I call the cautionary category of Hadoop. Hadoop has turned into be a really good technology when it's deployed for the right business problem. The problem with Hadoop 3 and 4 years ago, people got confused. They thought it was a database. They thought it's where you manage all your information, you do all your work on it. We came to find out, well, it was lacking a lot of the governance, it was lacking a lot of the features that you actually need to run your business. It didn't have everything you needed. So the cautionary note around Hadoop is really good as a place to put data, bring it together. You tend to trade off the ease of use of getting data together with data governance, data lineage, and a little bit of the cautionary note was realized by a number of companies, said, okay, I got all that data in my Hadoop cluster, but without any security and governance, I can't control who has access to it. And we've seen a lot of data disclosures, inappropriate data disclosures, come as a result of it. And then the cloud databases, now all the cloud vendors are saying, oh, I have a database too. A little bit of a cautionary note there is, if you pick some of these cloud vendor databases, you're not just picking your database, you're picking your cloud vendor well into the future. So the question is, something like DynamoDB from Amazon, is that ever going to run on premise? Is that ever going to run on the Microsoft cloud? Will that run on the Oracle cloud if you have an Oracle cloud deployment? So there's kind of that question of, hey, the technology might be okay. Again, it depends on the use case. It depends on the business problem. So what do businesses need? If we switch from the trends and the direction and the hype, and let's get back to something simple of kind of what do they need? We talked about earlier, what they need is the data to run their business. And that's the key focus. They want a database that integrates data better, faster, and with lower cost. The idea says, I have all this data. I want to be able to do something with it. Well, if I want to do something with it, I have to bring all the islands of data, or what we call silos, and I have to bring all those together, and I need to do it much faster. What caused the mainframe migration off the mainframe, everybody's got lots of, kind of what I call revisionist history on why the mainframe, quote, died, even though it's all there still. IBM sells as much of it as they ever did. But it didn't really die. But the reason people started transitioning is because when they went to their application developers, and they said, I need this new capability to run my business and modify my business, IT would say, yeah, that's great. What an exciting project. Come back to me in 5 years, and I'll show you that running. And oh, by the way, transfer millions of dollars from your budget to my budget. So millions of dollars in 5 years, I can give you whatever you want. In a way, the relational projects we see today, a lot of those relational projects look the same way. You go to somebody and you say, yeah, I'm going to take years to get this and spend millions of dollars. If I need to meet a new regulation in banking, you don't have years to implement a new regulation in banking. They don't give you 5 years anymore. And we have this whole notion of I have to operate and I have to run my business in real time. So how does that correlate? Well, it's that time dimension and cost dimension that's causing essentially another transition in the marketplace. And we're really thrilled with the product that we offer to help solve this problem. NoSQL databases could probably not be a more confusing category. The industry analysts didn't know what to call these next generation databases, so they put them all in one bucket and they put a NoSQL label across it. And we saw a lot of confusion over the last few years. That confusion, I mentioned swim lanes earlier, that all the vendors are kind of finding their swim lanes. We've kind of found our swim lane, and that's the notion of, hey, enterprise NoSQL, so worry about the things all of you need as big companies, security, governance, transactions. And then we introduced the idea of, why would you want a database that is just a database for looking at data, where it's not consistent, it's not governed, you don't have the lineage and all of that. And why would you want that if you can't do operations and transactions on it? Remember, we said you want to run your business based on your data. Well, that's the operational transactional part of it. And the Marklogic solution that we've brought to the marketplace makes it really easy to get data in. So we ingest data in, we index everything, we make it all searchable, we build a universal index on it, and it's a universal Ask Anything index, so that then it makes it really easy to get the data back out. We don't rewrite a Marklogic application every time the inputs change or every time somebody wants to ask a different question in the database. What we do is we create that universal index and bring it in, and then we worried about all the trusted features, transactional consistency, security. Most of our competitors in the NoSQL market still are to this day talking about eventual consistency, or we have 100% consistency, you just do it at the application level. Well, if you have to do it at the application level, not very many application developers understand how to write transactionally consistent applications at the application level. They weren't trained on it. The platforms have always done that. So the Marklogic solution is an operational transactional enterprise NoSQL database. A little bit of a mouthful, but we felt it was better to have a little bit of a mouthful and explain what it does than try to have a cute, clever title and leave you all guessing. But the core principles of it are the easy to get data in, easy to get data out, and 100% protected. And associated with it is ultimately, what is it? It's business agility. It's that I can move and I can migrate and I can make changes quicker. I don't rewrite applications every time somebody needs to do something different with it. So why is it better than the relational world? Well, it's lower cost. I mentioned agility, much faster time to results. We have very few projects in the Marklogic world that took over a year to do. We have customers that have told us, I've never done an IT project in less than 5 years, but I did this Marklogic project in 9 months. Or I did this Marklogic project in 3 months. We did a proof of concept for a police agency, and during the proof of concept, that police agency made 7 arrests off the proof of concept. So proof of concept was not a throwaway, it was a let's go solve your problem as a police agency, which is finding criminals. And that's how quick, that's where we're talking about agility. But if I look at the relational world, well, what do? I have this ETL process. I have to transform all the data to put it in the database. I then have to index it all to make it searchable. I then can query it, and then I deploy my application. All sounds pretty common to what you do for most applications. Transformation, index it, make it searchable. The problem with it, though, is once I get out to the query load, I start redoing things over and over and over again. So if my inputs or my data changes, what do I have to do? I have to change my ETL processes, and I have to, in relation, go change my schema if I'm adding new data to my database. In other words, if I'm adding new columns to my database. What's the other problem? Well, the indexes were built based on the question you want to ask. So if I have an index that says, I want to ask this particular question, so I'll organize my database indexes according to that question, and now you know what happens. The second you answer that question, they say, hey, that was really cool, that's great. What about this other thing? Then you're back into the, maybe I don't have that data, I have to retransform. And then secondly, once I retransform, I have to reindex again so I can make it searchable. So you get into this endless loop of do it over again, over and over and over. I sometimes use the term you're shooting at a moving target. Very difficult to shoot at a moving target. So you kind of get in this just endless loop, and there goes all your agility, there goes your time to results. So at the end of the day, this relational approach of doing these massive data transformation processes with all of this lack of agility in the indexing model, and that the model is indexed based on what I want to ask, really causes a problem. You know, think for a second to Google. What if Google made all of you transform your websites so they could make it searchable? We would probably be standing up here today and you go, Google? Who are they? What did they do? Because if they had waited for all of you that represent all of these different companies in the room to each transform your websites or transform your data so they could search it, there'd have to be data standards that everybody would have to agree to eventually. Then what happens if every time one of us gets on our browser on our mobile phones and we go and we do a Google search? Well, imagine how many DBAs it would take if they were re-indexing that Google infrastructure every time you wanted to ask a different question. There'd be a lot of DBAs. We would have if we thought we had a shortage today, imagine what that shortage would look like in that scenario. So what's the alternative to it? It goes back to that load data as is, search and harmonize it as it gets in, and then deploy it. And there is no endless cycle. If I have more data and my query it hits that new data, I pick up the new data. If I want to ask it a different question, it's an Ask Anything Universal Index. I don't go re-index my database. It's a little bit more like the Google approach and very far and very different and astray from the relational approach. And so you'll hear at the conference a lot of information about how to harmonize and bring data together. So what do we want to bring together? We want to bring together all kinds of different data types. And we don't want to do a lot of transformation or conversion of those data types. Some of the products out there, They make you convert your XML document to a JSON document because the database is a JSON document store. Well, you don't really want to convert your XML to JSON, and you don't want to convert your JSON to XML. You want a multi-model capability, the idea that says I can bring in any kind of data, any shape, any form. I can bring in all that data. And it can be text data, it can be geospatial data, it can be information that's binary. I can bring in lots of different kinds of database. You want that multi-model capability, which is what our focus is bring all your data in natively and put it in the database. The idea that I have to transform my data, and even the little subtle thing of I have to go from XML to JSON for some of the products, that's a major task. You're just adding another piece of workflow to an already complex project. So then we focus on, well, if I have all the data in, what do I want to do next? I want to build an application. And I want to build that application, and I want that agility. If I think about the application, I think about agility. If I'm looking at something like MiFID II, once I get all the data in to meet my MiFID II requirements, if I'm a global bank, well, do you think that's the last regulation you're going to face? Or are you going to see MiFID III, MiFID IV, and MiFID V over time? And what about the aunt, uncle, and cousin of MiFID? Because we've all watched in regulated industries over and over and over, regulators change their mind as to what they want you to report on. But if I brought all my data in, and it's in an agile repository, I'm protecting myself against that future problem that says, hey, if the data changes, or the regulator I have to keep happy as a bank, if they change, I don't have to rewrite everything. Same thing in clinical trials and pharmaceuticals. Well, what if the question, because of one finding, the regulator who's got to approve, the FAA who's got to approve a drug says, well, did you see this other condition since you saw that condition? Well, the faster you can respond to that, the faster the life cycle of your drug is to the marketplace or your device. So we're talking about that agility to meet it once your data is in there and build different applications. And then the whole notion of real time. I don't want to wait until I've massaged the data and I've changed all the data to start getting results from my data. I need to do things in real time. Things need to happen in real time. We've done a lot of work in the intelligence community for years and years, and the idea is not to find out about something and what happened 6 months ago. The idea is to identify certain kinds of conditions in real time. And the same is true in a lot of businesses. If I look at fraud detection, anomaly detection, if I look at the speed at which things happen in today's marketplace, I can't wait to identify things that might be fraudulent. Think about your credit card companies. Can they really wait until you get your bill to go, oh my God, somebody stole my credit card number and here's all these new charges? They're far better off catching that in real time. Well, the same thing's true for all systems is real-time capabilities. So we have a notion in Marklogic of real-time alerting that says, as the data comes in the database, I can pre-store a bunch of conditions, a bunch of queries, and if the data matches any of those things I'm looking for, I'll take some action. Operational, transactional, alerting, I can do something about it in real time. If I'm going through transformation processes, conversion processes with my data, then I have a lag time. So we eliminate that lag time. We basically say as it comes across the pipe, you can use that data. So then any data silo. So there's lots of different silos out there, and we want to be able to integrate these data silos. So I have my structured, unstructured, and structured data. I want to bring that together. We see a lot of projects around metadata, regulatory data, ERP system consolidation. So I'm going to talk about each of these. Remember that I have these kinds of data silos, but on the other side of it, I still want to do the transactional, analytical, and downstream systems. I want to run my business on my data. It all comes back to I've got to be able to run my business on the data. So if we look at one example here in the structured versus unstructured world, think about something like Dow Jones, financial information. Is financial information all structured? Well, one could argue, yeah, a lot of it is structured. A lot of it is stock prices, ticker prices. At what time was the price on what date somewhere in the world? But then what about, is that all you look at if you're going to buy a stock or sell a stock? Probably not. You're probably going to look at all the headlines. Those headlines might be coming from metadata. You might want to read a whole article on it. Well, that could be the unstructured content that says, I found an article relevant to the stock you're thinking of trading. So that whole idea of much bigger, much more powerful if I have all the data together in a single repository. The old approach, by the way, that Dow Jones used was a fast search engine talking to an autonomy document management system and putting all the data into an Oracle database. You know, kind of what's wrong with that picture? Well, I'm transforming all the data. I'm not really dealing with the unstructured data because I'm in a document management system from autonomy. So I'm not getting the benefit. All I can really search is the titles of the different documents. I can't search the content of the documents. So I'm not in content management, I'm in document management. And then ultimately, it was very hard and very expensive to get that information put in a repository so that one of the most profitable information products in the world, Factiva, could actually be able to search and look for that information. So we see a lot of this, and that applies, this structured, unstructured, it applies to every industry we've seen. I sometimes remind people, every industry has a publishing problem with their data because you have information you need to distribute. What about metadata? Metadata has become really interesting. It's probably one of the topics we're spending the most time on with a lot of our customers now is, can you integrate metadata? Can I create a database of metadata? Metadata is the knowledge about data. It's the descriptor, it's the governance, it's the lineage. It has lots of knowledge about data. And we're actually seeing massive repositories of nothing but metadata. One example up here is Morgan Stanley. They kind of did what I call a CMDB on steroids. It's everything that you would want to do with ServiceNow or a BMC CMDB in that I want to bring all my asset inventory together. The difference is if I take that asset inventory, I put it in a Marklogic database, and now I take semantic relationships, all of a sudden I can get the relationships between different assets. And it started out in Morgan Stanley as just an IT asset inventory system, and it's evolving from an IT system. It's actually evolving to a platform now where they'll build lots of different applications around it, where they want to inventory assets and understand the relationship from one asset to another asset, or understand the relationship of one collection of assets potentially to a different collection of assets. But it's all based on metadata. So we're seeing a lot of projects around just pure metadata. What about integrating regulatory data? Integrating regulatory data has been huge. We've been doing that for a long time. I mentioned MiFID II. That's what we did up at ABN AMRO. And we went, Dutch bank, large player. You have these regulations. I have to bring the data together. What they get because they used a Marklogic environment is they now have that agility as they do their regulatory data to meet the new requirements. We don't rewrite the database every time the regulators want you to ask a different question. So a much more powerful approach. We're also seeing a lot of projects now around ERP integrations. One of these, Aetna Insurance, you'll be able to hear from Mike Fillion. He's given a presentation on it sometime after lunch. It's one of the breakout sessions where it's bring together ERP data. Well, what is the ERP data? It's HR data. It's HR data from 140 different places. Aetna's been a very big acquirer of other companies. There's been lots of consolidation in the U.S. healthcare insurance marketplace and just in general in the healthcare industry. So if you're involved in a merger, it's pretty hard to integrate all that ERP data. I talked to another customer a couple weeks ago, and they had just finished a major merger, almost a merger of equals. Well, how are you consolidating your financials? Well, that's the problem because we have this deadline, and we pour it all into Excel, and then we try to normalize it in Excel, and then we try to deliver out our quarterly financials. And I said, well, when are you going to solve that in ERP? They said, well, if we start an ERP project today to solve it, 5 years from now we'll have a resolution to it. And by then we will have we'll purchased 10 more companies. So the problem will be just as big. So we're just seeing a lot of this ERP data. The manufacturing company mentioned up here, the project just getting underway, they have 210 different ERP systems. 210. Now I would tell you nobody plans their business that way, but that's what happens when you buy different products, you bring in different businesses, and you start doing what's really become a very active merger and acquisition market, is every one of them comes with its own financial system, HR system, manufacturing system. All of a sudden I have 215 different data feeds, and I have to bring those together. So we're seeing a lot of projects around that. And then we're seeing a lot of mainframe projects around finally integrating legacy mainframe data, usually generation skipping, usually involving some form of coexistence, meaning I'm using XA transactions to keep things current between the new environment and the old environment. One of our military customers, I was with him about 6-8 weeks ago at the Pentagon, and he's just like, for the first time, I've been talking about mainframe migration forever, and now he's got a sense of desperation. And I said, what is the sense of desperation? And he says, well, there's this lady, and she's worked for me for a long time, and she's 56 years old. She's been here over 30 years, and she is about to retire. And when she retires, I don't have anybody that knows anything about any of that COBOL code or how any of our mainframes that support the business of this particular agency, the business side, to run that part of the business. So sense of urgency of the skills are going to leave the building. One of our healthcare customers here, they refer to it as their billion-dollar mainframe problem. That's what they're spending on mainframes. It's a massive spend. The example here that I'll talk about is Arian Insurance. Arian Insurance, pretty conservative place. Insurance industry tends to be a pretty conservative industry, but they had a need to have a single customer master. They had already kind of worked on it in the DB2 environment on the mainframe. The trouble with it is it's very fragile. They couldn't really tell, given all the entity descriptions of who a customer might be, am I really looking at a single customer? Or is that 5 different customers? So it was very fragile, and they were having difficulty just having a single customer master. So they had to solve that problem differently. So they moved on to a new generation of database. So that's kind of a quick view of kind of the Marklogic world. But what does the future hold? What's actually happening in the future? I'm going to look at 3 different trends. The first one is data in silos. Data in silos is a huge problem. ETL is not the way to solve it. I think most people are starting to recognize that if I'm running ETL processes, I have a gaping wound and I'm covering it with a Band-Aid. And it's just not solving the problem. It's not controlling the situation. And so the need to move away. So this integrating data in silos is a huge problem. If we look, data silos are everywhere. I've yet to walk into a customer and talk about data silos where they say, I don't have any. I can't say that. I actually have walked into companies, they don't have any, and then I start asking about 3 questions, and they look back and go, oh, I guess I have silos too. And then I started asking them, well, wouldn't it be neat if you could look at data from that silo to that silo and correlate it and then do something different in your business? And the answer I got from one customer is, I've been waiting to do that for 20 years. Just get that simple process done. So on average, a multinational company, 187 different subsidiaries, 50% of them have 6 or more different finance systems, and 60% of them have 6 or more different 60% of them have 6 or more different reporting systems. This is a standard on average multinational company. Silos are a huge problem. So what we've been focusing on is our continued evolution of our multi-model capability to continue to make it faster and easier to integrate data. We're going to bring it all together. I want to bring all different kinds of data together. I want to bring my relational data, my mainframe data, my next-gen data, my last-generation data. I want to bring it all together, and then I want to have knowledge about the data, which is where semantics is played in. I think we're up to about 50% of our customer base now using semantics. When I stood up at Marklogic World in Europe 3 years ago, we told everybody semantics is going to be really interesting. It's going to add tremendous value. And we spent a lot of time at our conference 3 years ago talking about what semantics is. What you should be doing at the conference today is really talking to people who have actually used it and see what they've actually done with it. Cloud computing. Cloud is important. I would suggest that you want to be very careful about vendor lock-in. So first of all, $500 billion, it's big. Cloud is huge. It's one of the, I would say, one of the more massive trends of my 30-plus years in the industry, one of the more massive migrations, where we're making a wholesale embrace a new way of running infrastructure. 89% of organizations, though, they have data in one cloud vendor. That's kind of the cautionary note, right? I'm put all my eggs in one basket. We actually saw Amazon had a couple outages a few months back, and we saw all kinds of businesses that were shut down. Now, Amazon doesn't have a lot of outages. Not criticizing them because internal IT has a lot of outages, but they had not mitigated their risk. They were set on one vendor, and when that one vendor struggled, then they and a lot of other businesses around the globe were suddenly impacted. So you have to ask yourself, is that really smart? Snapchat, they went public. We looked at all their disclosures like we do on a lot of tech companies going public. They had signed a $2 billion cloud agreement with Google. And if you went to their risk factors in their filings, the risk factors were full of all kinds of interesting detail about all the risk associated with being on a single vendor, including that it would cost billions of dollars and take years of re-engineering for them to move to a different cloud supplier should they have to do one. That shouldn't really be in the risk factors. It would have been pretty easy for them to adopt a more cloud-neutral approach that says, I won't use the proprietary APIs of Google, so I actually have the flexibility to move from one cloud vendor to another. And ultimately, a couple weeks later, they came out and said, well, we actually now signed a $1 billion transaction for the next several years to also have Amazon Cloud. But they have to rewrite a lot of their material to do that. We've seen this movie before in the IT outsourcing world. People rushed to outsource their data centers, and then what happened? All those outsourcers, IBM Global Services, EDS, others, they started adding profit margin to what they were doing. Cloud vendors largely running at a loss today. Are they going to do that forever? Or does there come a time 3 to 5 years from now where they add profit to it? Well, if they add profit to it, what if you want to bring an application back in-house? What if you want to move it to another cloud vendor for better economics? We're really early in the cloud move. We don't know how it's going to turn out. We don't really know yet who's going to win. And you don't want to fall victim to that outsourcing thing where 10 years later I want to bring my data center back in, but I have no data center, I have no people. And so I have to rebuild my whole IT system. So we've seen that movie before. So cloud is terrific. I want all of you, and I'd suggest that all of you really think about cloud neutrality that says, I don't know who's going to win, and I also want the benefit of being able to move applications around to different cloud providers. So the Marklogic approach on this, by the way, is a cloud neutrality. Build your application once and run it wherever you want. We've had customers, we had one big customer move to Google Compute. They ran their tests over there. It took them about 2 weeks to get everything all set up. They ran their tests on Google Compute. They looked at the economics, and they were moving there because their on-premise data center is not a very good data center in their minds. And then they kind of looked over and they saw the economics, and they said, we really like our data center that's not so good anymore, because that data center was a much different economic advantage. They moved it back. They then made a decision that said, oh, but I do have these elastic pieces in my application. Let me put those up in Amazon. They now run in a hybrid cloud environment. So how could they do that if they'd gone down the path of something like DynamoDB? Whatever they built would run on Amazon, wouldn't run on-premise, certainly wouldn't run in Microsoft's cloud, it wouldn't run in Google's cloud. So you really have to think about cloud neutrality. Data security, this is a part of the market that I think is going through the most significant shift of any part of the market. And it comes because of inappropriate data disclosures. When I look at the Snowden case, and I know the Snowden case is something that's understood globally, it actually a big topic in Japan even. The question on Snowden is not why or how or anything else he disclosed all the data. The question I always ask is, why did he have access to all that data? He did not need access to that much data. And the reality is he didn't break into anything. He was an invited guest. He was a consultant of an integrator in a US intelligence agency that took a bunch of data and sent it to Russia. So the question is, why did he do that? Why did he disclose all that data? And the reason that happens is because most organizations today are focused on network security. They're focused on the shell. They're focused on the idea of, I'm going to keep people out of my network. But today's modern IT enterprises, you have openings in your network. Your customers are connecting directly to your systems. You're connecting your business systems to other business systems with your suppliers. So all of a sudden, I have an open network, but I haven't fundamentally changed the way I manage my data. So 63% of organizations, they deploy new IT projects without appropriate data security measures. This was one of the real challenges of the Hadoop infrastructure, is made it really easy to put the data together, but I don't know where it came from, I don't know the lineage of it, I don't know the governance of it, and I can't secure it. Well, that didn't make it as usable as all of you may have wanted it to be. And so what you have to start thinking about is very granular, role-based control mechanisms for the data. We spend about $16 billion annually on network security, and data security has always been the ugly stepchild. Nobody paid attention to it. But now you have to assume people are going to be in my network, either invited or uninvited. If they're in there, let me have a database architecture and let me have my data stored in a way that that data is actually protected. And that's a lot of the focus around Marklogic 9 is solving tomorrow's problems today. We announced the production version of Marklogic 9 at our Chicago event a few weeks ago. So it's all in production, it's all out there, and there's 3 major focuses on it. One is we're integrating data in silos, so all kinds of technology. David and others will talk about the technology to make it easier to integrate data. We know that our customers are running very large, very complex clusters. We run on commodity Intel architecture, so some of our customers have hundreds, if not thousands, of servers. I have to have a more effective way of managing that. So data manageability and managing the database gets to be a much bigger topic. We introduced all kinds of capabilities with Ops Director around being able to manage your database, even things like opt-in telemetry, where we'll start monitoring your database and let you know if we see something happen. Again, opt-in or opt-out. If you're willing to share your operational data, all's good. Data security was the centerpiece of the Marklogic 9 release. Very granular security. The idea that I can redact data, that I can have people sharing a massive amount of data, but any given individuals, while I may have hundreds sharing the same repository, they all have their own individual security. I can have 2 people in the same department looking at a particular contract. One can see all of the contract, one can't see any of the business terms. Really important if you're doing scale-level testing of very insensitive data. Because do you want your QA team to see all the data? Well, the ability to anonymize the data becomes very, very powerful. And then in something like clinical trials, if I go to clinical trials, does the people doing the statistical analysis of the clinical trial, do they need to know the patient name? Well, if I can mask the patient name and the personal identifying information, they can still run all their analysis, but I don't have to worry about a HIPAA disclosure. HIPAA is a big medical privacy information, federal law, huge fines, and there's been huge fines paid on it. And it's because I want to share the data, I need to share the data, I need to look at a clinical trial in the aggregate of what happened to all the patients, but I didn't really need the people doing the statistical analysis to have access to that private information. So what we're doing is we're making Marklogic 9, we've always been the most secure NoSQL database in the market. With Marklogic 9, we're now the most secure database in the market. There's things in this that relational databases have never been able to do. I had one of our banking CIOs, we were explaining electronic redaction. The idea that 2 people see the same document, they get a totally different view based on their security privileges. His response is, I've been waiting for that for 30 years. So we're really excited about what Marklogic 9 brings and that we're meeting kind of the promise and a dream that people had around being able to really secure the data. But I want you to really focus on how important it is to secure your data. Think of how much time and money you spend securing your network, and then ask yourselves, how well am I protected? How well is my data protected if somebody gets through my network? And if I want to share data, can I safely share data? One of the downsides of sharing data is I'm sharing data. I'm giving people access to information, so it's about safe sharing. We're not here to stop you from sharing. What we're trying to do with security is make it so you can have people sharing data, but I have very granular controls so that I can safely share the data. That's what that's all about. So the conference today, and what makes it so exciting for us is all the different unique applications that many of you have built. And so what really makes Marklogic a great product is all your input all year long, bringing that innovation. We take that innovation, we put it back into the product. We didn't go down the path of data security just because it was data security. Our customers, knowing that they're integrating all this data, needed more security. They needed more manageability. But what really makes this conference is you exchanging information about the kinds of applications that we're building up there. I want to thank you all for attending. I want you to enjoy the day today. We'll see you at the cocktail reception. Please stay on through the whole day. The breakout sessions are phenomenal, and I really encourage you to attend the breakout sessions, talk to each other. There's some great innovation going on here, And most importantly, I want to thank all of you as being Marklogic customers. Thank you very much.